Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Kelly, the CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Communications with SBAM. Welcome to the show. As I welcome you, I also want to welcome one of our new members, Meraki Social. They're located in Saugatuck, and they consider themselves an unagency. They're a marketing company built of technology, brains, and trust, but not on billable hours and bloat. So kind of a different way to look at that. So welcome to Meraki Social. And of course, we're welcoming this member on behalf of our sponsor, the Marana Group, who is a data document and distribution company in Kalamazoo. So we have a lot of topics to cover today. So Brian, our colleague, Alexa Kramer, was actually at a bill signing with Governor Whitmer today that's expanding access to childcare.
Yeah, so we've been real active in this space. Really, anything that we see in the way of the workers in their pursuit of the workforce and being able to participate more fully in the workforce is part of our agenda. Childcare being one of those components. Alexa Kramer, who's our director of government operations, has been very intimately involved in the childcare discussions and work that has occurred at the Capitol over the past couple of years. And that work culminated today in a bill signing that it was really aimed at trying to try to ease the regulatory burden on the providers. And this is, so it's an area where it's not so cut and dried in how you make changes in this area, where you have to balance the, of course, safety and affordability and early childhood education, so many different aspects to it. But just as an example, those child care providers with certain licenses that say how many children that they can handle, those with a good record could take on more children, just as an example, cutting red tape and trying to create a clearer path for more providers to be successful and to both to start and to expand here in Michigan. And we know in many parts of our state, there are big shortages in child care providers. So big win today. It seems like our system sometimes is frustratingly slow. That's good when you want to stop things. It's bad when you want to make things happen. And so this is it's a big day, nice bipartisan win, where Republicans and Democrats in the legislature, a lot of different types of groups and organizations, including the Small Business Association of Michigan and the governor, on the same page. And it's nice when that works out that way every once in a while. So big day, bill signing, and maybe we'll put a little something on the website once we get the pictures and things from there.
Yep, absolutely. You can find out more on our website shortly. So the state of Michigan, there's a court ruling, and they're required now to cover attorney fees for those who sued the state to have emergency powers struck down. So walk us through that.
Yeah, it's one of those cases. I thought it was kind of an interesting story, where you might remember in the fall of 2020. There was a lawsuit decided at the Michigan Supreme Court to strike down as unconstitutional the Emergency Powers of the Governor Act. And that was the act that the governor was using for the kind of unlimited in duration emergency powers. And the state lost by a 4-3 vote at the Supreme Court that case. Well, those who brought the suit were also suing for the state to have to pay their legal expenses, and the state is going to pay legal expenses of $200,000 to those bringing the suit, and which included, by the way, the Mackinac Center, which is kind of a free market think tank that's located in Midland, and so the state will be paying the legal costs, the attorney fees, for the lawsuit that they had lost. So I don't know, I just thought it made me maybe a little happy when I saw that, because it was an area where the extent to which that Emergency Powers Act was being used was so far beyond anything that we had seen before. And the idea that it was challenged and challenged successfully, of course, the most important part. But when a court decides to assign legal fees, for the losing side to pay the legal cost to the winning side, what the court is saying in that case is that the losing side should have known. They shouldn't have let it go that far. It shouldn't have ever come to this. Therefore, you need to pay legal expenses. So it was it was a good outcome to the case, of course, but just a little follow on here to some pandemic news. That's seems like it was a long time in the rear view mirror when we were dealing with the Emergency Powers of the Governor Act, but that is put to bed. And as far as I know, this is the last little tidbit of legal action behind this issue.
All right. We've covered the gas taxes extensively. We've talked about a state gas tax holiday. Now President Biden is calling for a federal gas tax holiday. So what are the thoughts on this happening?
Yeah, this is, I feel like we've been kind of full circle on this now, and the president now is saying he'd be in favor of a gas tax holiday. The federal gas tax like 18 cents a gallon, so it's not as big as the state gas and sales taxes. There's mixed reviews on this. What sort of difference will it make? Regardless of what goes into the price, the amount of demand for gasoline is what determines what the price is. It's just a commodity, and so restrictions in supply and then the amount being demanded, those two things really set the price. If you take taxes off it, what will likely happen? Short term, there might be a bit of a dip. However, because there's demand and a constricted supply, that might just very well push the price right back up to where it was anyway. So there's a bit of a debate happening on this. I'm not confident that it will end up happening, but I'm also not confident that it would in the end make a difference or much of a difference. So at the state level, where there are more taxes, there's a 6% sales tax and then a separate gas tax in addition to that, on which is per gallon. That's bigger than 18 cents. Actually, a lot bigger, more than twice as big at the state level. So in terms of whether it makes a long-term difference, you'd see a bigger short-term difference if you're talking about the state revenues. Not surprisingly, the governor was talking about the feds can cut theirs, but not really interested in cutting the states.
All right, well, we'll certainly keep everyone updated on this. So let's cover a few other economic issues. The Senate Fiscal Agency is reporting revenues down from a year ago. So what does this really indicate?
Yeah, this is, we haven't seen this happening as of late. The government revenues are tied to different economic activities, and we're used to seeing quarter after quarter after quarter, they're coming in higher than than in previous years. What really caught my attention was that the Senate Fiscal Agency here at the state level has indicated that May revenues were down 8.9% from a year ago. And that's across the board with general and school aid funds. Now, that's not to say it's 8.9% less than what they were expecting, just 8.9% less than what it was last year. And so it is a sign of kind of a normalization of revenues, because you might recall that there were a lot of federal dollars being just pumped into the economy in 2020 and 2021. And most of that resulted in some level of tax revenue back to the government. So government saw record increases. So when you get payments from the government, might be unemployment payments, those are taxable in the income tax. You get extra, child tax credits. You might get extra stimulus payments. Those have taxable ramifications to the government. So we saw government revenues soar through that time period, and looking at the Senate Fiscal Agency's May reports, you can see that that's settling down more, still at historic high levels, by the way. Inflation, for example, is going to put the sales tax revenues, inflation will keep those higher than what they historically would be. But you take all the the stimulus payments from the federal government out of the mix, naturally it's not going to be as high as it was during those time periods. But really across the board, the when you compare May of this year to May of last year, you saw sales and income taxes um, and all the major categories being off the previous year. But again, not less than what they were expected. So don't expect anybody in state government to be talking about cuts of any time soon, because they're still historically very high overall revenue.
All right, and as we talk about inflation, it kind of ties into a couple of stories. Earlier this week, we shared a story from our partners, the American Society of Employers, about wages being up about 4%, which I think was like almost double from what it was last year. But inflation is still outpacing wage growth. So what can people expect?
Yeah, whenever the Federal Reserve takes action, they update the public on what they're seeing, what they're projecting, what they expect to happen. And this is one of the expectations, that even though we are seeing wage growth at higher levels than normal, there is an expectation that wage growth will not exceed inflation, which means that the overall disposable income, the purchasing power of wages, is likely to be net less in the future than it is now. And that's it's something that we're used to inflation being so low for so long, that even very small wage increases result in additional purchasing power. That is not likely to be the case in really the next couple of years. So they've kind of set the expectation that that even when even though they expect the inflation to settle down from where it is today, they're not expecting it to go down to levels that we would consider to be low. So just as an example, the federal officials predicted that that while wages will go up maybe around 4%, that inflation will still be higher. Not likely to stay as high as 8.5% like it's been, but definitely higher. And then on the heels of that, the Federal Reserve is talking about what they expect with unemployment. And unemployment is it's kind of a mixed bag. When you have labor shortages, the having the unemployment rate move up, and sometimes it creates a little extra room for people to hire, to make some hires. So we're trained always to think, well, unemployment rate is might go up, and I think the feds were projecting that it would it'd go up about a half a point to 5.2% by the end of the year nationally. And usually if the feds go up that amount, Michigan will go up a little more than that. That when you're competing for employees, to the extent that there's still demand for the work in a softening economy, that the ability to find employees might actually be eased somewhat by the end of the year. So this economic picture is as muddy as I've ever seen it. The number of mixed signals that are out there, wage growth sounds good, purchasing power going down because inflation is still going to be high. Inflation might be trailing off somewhat, but it's still going to be higher than wage growth. And then unemployment going, potentially the unemployment rate going up, meaning that that the economy is likely to soften and need fewer people. And yet in a tight labor environment, that might be just what employers need to find employees and get those folks back in their workforce. So it's a mixed bag out there at best. The equities market has really, it's a major correction that we've been through, affecting confidence. You put all these things together, And it spells a complicated and potentially difficult rest of the year.
While we're talking about workers and workforce, this is not on our list of topics, but we did issue a call to action yesterday about the earned income tax credit. Can you talk a little bit about that, and I'll drop the link in?
Yes, thank you, Sarah, for bringing that up. We are, what I told you in the beginning, like at childcare, we're talking about how do we get more people in the workforce and how do we remove obstacles from people being in the workforce. We're also supportive of a policy that would create an incentive, a bigger incentive, or maybe look at it as a reward for those who are in the workforce, even if they're at lower skill levels. And so there's something called the Earned Income Tax Credit. It's been around. It's a federal tax credit. It's been around since the 1980s. And earned income means somebody who has earned income, like W-2 wages. They have a job, and to the extent that that you're a worker and you're a worker at lower income levels, and yet you're still showing up and doing the work, that you get a tax credit to help. Kind of essentially, the idea is lifting you out of poverty or into that from those lower income categories. And that right now at the state level, the state puts a 6% kicker on the federal credit. So if you have a federal credit and earned income tax credit that comes to $1,000, the state of Michigan says, when you do your state tax return, we're going to add 6% to that, an extra $60 on top of that. There are proposals to make that 20 or 30%. So it'd be an extra $200 or $300 on top of the federal, for every $1,000 of federal credit that you get. So the idea here is to do literally the opposite of what the unemployment system does, which is pay people who are unemployed. This would be a reward and incentive for having a job and keeping a job. And so this has been moving its way through the process. It's part of the budget negotiation because it would be a net decrease in the amount of revenue that the state is getting from income taxes. But when we look at the way income taxes have been soaring over the last few years, it seems like a good time to bump up that earned income tax credit and hope that it inspires more people to enter the workforce, or those who are already in the workforce provide a bigger incentive, a bigger reward for working. So, if I were to kind of simplify it, I'd say, wouldn't it be nice if the government incentivized people to work instead of not work? And that's what the earned income tax credit is all about.
And our call to action, I think, is pretty simple. You just enter in your name, address. It finds your legislators for you. You can use the template we've created and send that note off to them. So thank you in advance for doing that. All right. So in the recent week or so, Governor Whitmer has signed legislation that's going to require personal finance instruction in our schools. And I saw that and I thought, well, this seems like a good solid idea. So what does the legislation entail?
Yeah, and this is a piece of legislation that SBAM supported. The idea of, there's reading and writing and arithmetic, and when somebody becomes an adult, the idea of having some personal finance knowledge is something that functional society and functional adults need to have. And some schools offered it, and many didn't. And so it's an offering. What a bill passed in bipartisan fashion through the House and the Senate. The governor recently signed it, and all schools will have to offer this as part of their curriculum. So it's something that will be available in every high school that offers state endorsed diplomas. And it's one of those things where it's not going to change the world, but just it's intentional teaching of personal finances. And in this, I have to believe this could be a net positive for students and providing some very, very practical education on things, and I look back on my life, I'm not really sure how I learned about personal finance. I think it's just trial and error as you grow up and get into it. So the idea of being more intentional about adding that in, it'll be a good difference, a good addition to the offerings of our public high schools.
Definitely. All right, so finally, there is a new gubernatorial poll out for our Michigan candidates. What is the latest?
Yeah, and this is a Republican primary poll. Remember, the Democratic primary is, there's no competition there. Gretchen Whitmer will be nominated as the nominee in the upcoming election. On the Republican side, there's still an active race. It's been kind of erratic. There were 10 candidates, and then there were ballot access issues, and now it's down to 5 candidates with a write-in and a 6th write-in. There was a poll out today that Mitchell did, and it does show some movement. Only polled the 5 that are on the ballot. So Chief James Craig is running a write-in candidate that was not included in the poll. Write-in candidates on a statewide basis are, it's a really big uphill battle. It'd be difficult to poll that, so it wasn't included in the poll. But it shows that Tudor Dixon and Kevin Rinke are the 2 candidates on top of the Republican primary at 15% each. So both tied. Kevin Rinke has been on TV, and his strength seems to be more outstate, even though he's from Southeast Michigan. Whereas Tudor Dixon, who got a big boost recently from endorsed and supported by the DeVos family, big players in Republican politics, then the Michigan Chamber of Commerce, and also Right to Life, which is a big, in Republican primaries, is a big player. And so she has moved up to kind of tied for first place. The last public poll that was done, Ryan Kelly was number 1. Still pretty close, statistically tied, but 13%. Ryan Kelly is the one that was in the news recently for being arrested for entering the Capitol on January 6th in the United States Capitol. I don't know exactly what the charges were there, but was arrested and now out on bail and awaiting that process. So some suggested that maybe that would help him. I was a little skeptical on that. The poll shows that it hasn't. The other candidates are rising. Doesn't look like it's hurt him either. It's about the same as what I believe it was in the previous poll. So Tudor Dixon, Kevin Rinke, number 1 and 2. Ryan Kelly coming in at number 3, but statistically very close to the first 2. And then at 8%, Garrett Soldano, chiropractor that led that Unlock Michigan petition drive before, and a lot of grassroots activity that I see happening all around the state. And then a pastor, Ralph Rebrand, at 3%. So add all those up, and it's like 54, 55%, and which means that you got 40-some% undecided at this point. So still a very wide open race, but looking at the movement in just the last few weeks, definitely, if you're the Tudor Dixon campaign or the Kevin Rinke campaign, you really like this, because the things that have happened in the last few years, or the last few weeks, last month or so, it seems to be moving those numbers. So this is the contest for who will have the privilege of being the opposition to Gretchen Whitmer in the fall primary. Remember, and I want to make sure we have a disclaimer that SBAM is not taking and are not planning to take any position in the Republican primary. Our group of small business owners that run the Political Action Committee will consider this race and whether or not we get involved after the primary sometime in the early fall. So we like you to be well informed and understanding what's moving and who's doing what in politics. This is one that we don't have a dog in this fight at this point, but stay tuned, and maybe we will, maybe we won't. At the end of the day, it's the beauty of our process. It's not up to me, not up to our staff. It's up to our members, small business owners, who call the shots around here.
But we do have a list of endorsed candidates for House and Senate seats right on our homepage. Just scroll down a bit, you can click and see all of our endorsed candidates and link out to their campaign websites too. So check that out. That's all we have for today. We'll be back here on Monday. If you are, just a reminder, going to be in Ann Arbor on June 29th, or I think we're in Kalamazoo on June 30th. I just pulled up the website to check that out. You can come to our owner-to-owner meetings. Yes, Kalamazoo, June 30th, Ann Arbor, June 29th, networking for small business owners. And of course, you can look at all of our other upcoming events on sbam.org. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you here Monday.
Thanks, everybody. I see you on Monday.